Antoinette Frank, born on April 30th, 1971. She is a former police officer from New Orleans. She was found guilty of robbing a restaurant where a fellow officer served as a security guard, as well as the killings of 3 individuals, including her police department partner, who was also a security guard at the restaurant. Frank is currently incarcerated at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, and she is one of 2 women on death row in the state. Frank experienced a tumultuous childhood, yet she harbored a lifelong aspiration of becoming a police officer from a young age. Frank came from a fragmented family background, with her brother being a fugitive and her father being sporadically present in her life. These circumstances greatly troubled Frank, leading her to seek psychiatric assistance. Additionally, Frank asserted that she endured sexual, emotional, and physical abuse from her father during her childhood. Frank submitted an application to the New Orleans Police Department in 1993. However, there were multiple concerning indicators that arose during the hiring procedure. She had been discovered to provide false information on various parts of her application, and she did not pass 2 routine psychiatric assessments. Dr. Philip Scurria, a psychiatrist, conducted an evaluation and strongly recommended against her employment, describing her as superficial and lacking depth. When it seemed that her application was being delayed, despite her objections to Dr. Scurria's assessment, she left a suicide note and vanished for more than a day. However, the New Orleans Police Department faced a constant shortage of personnel, and they were in urgent need of recruiting more officers. Despite her questionable background, they made exceptions and hired her on February 7th, 1993. She successfully completed her training at the police academy and graduated on February 28th of 1993. On November 25th, 1994, Frank was involved in responding to a shooting incident where Rogers Lacaze, a recognized drug dealer, and was one of the suspects. According to the investigator from the Department of Public Safety and Corrections, it is believed that the shooting incident on November 25th, 1994 was the first contact between Antoinette Frank and Rogers Lacaze. However, Frank's statement claims that they had met approximately 8 months prior to the murder. Their association grew close and frequent. Fellow police officers witnessed Lacaze driving her car and even saw him moving her police vehicle at the scene of an accident she was investigating. On one occasion, Lacaze accompanied her during a complaint call, and she introduced him as a trainee. There were other instances where Lacaze was introduced as her nephew. And during the Department of Corrections investigation, Antoinette refused to discuss her relationship with Rogers Lacaze, except to mention that she was trying to assist him. Subsequently, it did come to light that the 2 of them had a sexual relationship. Frank was deeply infatuated with Lacaze. When questioned about her decision to maintain the relationship, despite knowing about Lacaze's involvement in drug dealing and a shooting, she stated that she wouldn't sever ties with him solely based on his past. During the investigation, Antoinette Frank was asked about an incident where she allegedly attempted to purchase 9mm ammunition for Rogers Lacaze at Walmart on the day before the Kim On murders. She responded by stating that she was a police officer and saw no issue with buying ammunition. She denied being in a romantic or intimate relationship with Lacaze. She also declined to provide any information or discuss Officer Williams, the Vuse, or the murders. Instead, she repeatedly told the investigator to look it up in the record and maintained her innocence. Now, during her interview with the DOC investigator, she mentioned having a male suitor but declined to provide further details due to his affiliation with the police department. Testimony from John Stevens and Anthony Wallace revealed that they encountered Rogers Lacaze at a party on February 4th, 1995. As they were leaving this party, a verbal dispute erupted between Stevens and Lacaze. Wallace proposed leaving the scene, and the two men drove away in a car covering several blocks. During that time, a police vehicle conducted a traffic stop on the car. Antoinette Franks, dressed in her police uniform, stepped out of the squad car and instructed Wallace and Stevens to exit the vehicle and stand at the rear. It was at this moment that Wallace observed Lacaze with a firearm. According to Stevens, Wallace immediately confronted Lacaze, leading to a physical altercation between the two. Subsequently, both Stevens and Franks joined the fight, and during the struggle, a gunshot was discharged. Stevens immediately took off running, and at that moment, another individual arrived and apprehended both Lacaze and Wallace. Franks then informed the bystander that Lacaze was innocent while implicating Wallace as the troublemaker. The bystander held Wallace until additional law enforcement personnel arrived at the location. Wallace was subsequently apprehended and charged with attempted murder and armed robbery. During the trial, Irvin Bryant, a civil sheriff at the time, testified that he witnessed a police vehicle with its flashing lights activated on the evening of February 4th. Believing that it was a routine traffic stop, Bryant approached the scene and realized that the officer and two African-American males were engaged in a physical altercation on the roadside. Suddenly, Wallace managed to break free and hurriedly retrieved a Tech-9 semi-automatic weapon from the nearby grass. Responding swiftly, Bryant commanded Wallace to drop the firearm, which he promptly did. Bryant then apprehended and restrained Wallace, while Lacaze made a sudden aggressive movement towards him. Bryant quickly took hold of Lacaze, but Franks intervened, asserting that Lacaze was in her company, and she instructed Bryant to release him. Surprisingly, Bryant was never approached or interviewed by the police, and he never provided an official statement regarding the incident. On the evening of March 4th, 1995, Franks and Lacaze went to Kim An, a Vietnamese restaurant located in New Orleans East. After midnight, while the restaurant staff was cleaning up, Chow Vu, the sister of two victims, entered the kitchen to count the money. As she proceeded to the dining area to pay Officer Ronald A. Williams II, she noticed Franks approaching the restaurant in her red and white Ford Torino, which was in very poor condition. Earlier that night, Franks and Lacaze had visited the restaurant twice to obtain some leftover food. However, during their last visit, Chow had difficulty locating the front door key. Upon Franks' return to the restaurant for the third time, Chow had a strong sense that something was not right about this. Acting quickly, she rushed to the kitchen to hide the money in the microwave. Franks enters through the front door using the key that she had taken earlier, swiftly passing Officer Williams and pushing Chow, her brother Kwok, and a restaurant employee toward the kitchen doorway. Now, Officer Williams, he was curious about the situation, and he followed closely behind and inquired about the problem, like, what's going on here? Suddenly, gunshots erupted. In that moment, Franks turned back toward the dining room while Chow instinctively pulled Kwok with her to find a hiding spot. Lacaze, he had been positioned behind Officer Williams. You see, Officer Williams did not notice that he had snuck in behind him without Officer Williams noticing. Lacaze shoots him in the back of the neck, causing immediate paralysis by severing his spinal cord. The officer was then shot again in the head and in the middle of his back as he lay on the floor. Chow, Kwok, and the employee sought refuge in the rear section of her large walk-in cooler located in the kitchen. They turned off the light inside the cooler upon entering. The whereabouts of Chow's other siblings, Ha and Kwang, who were sweeping the dining room at the time of Frank's entry, remain unknown to them. They did not know where they were. From their vantage point inside the cooler, Chow and Kwok, they had a partial view of the kitchen and the front of the restaurant. Chow initially spotted Frank searching for something in the kitchen, but as Frank moved out of sight, more gunshots rang out. Kwok then witnessed Frank searching in the area where Vu family typically kept their money. Frank and Lacaze shouted and demanded the money, while Ha and Kwang had no knowledge of its hiding place. Again, it was hidden in the microwave because the sister was smart enough to know something doesn't seem right. Tragically, Ha, only 21 years old, was shot 3 times as she pleaded for her life, while 17-year-old Kwang endured 6 gunshot wounds and was also subjected to a pistol whipping. After Frank and Lacaze departed from the scene, Kwok emerged from the cooler and quickly left the restaurant through the back door to seek help from a nearby friend's residence, and she would call 911 right away to report the murders. Inside the cooler, Chow desperately attempted to contact emergency services using her cell phone, but due to the enclosed space, she was unable to receive a signal. After dropping off Lacaze at a nearby apartment complex, both aware that there were witnesses at the scene, Frank overheard a distress call on her portable police radio indicating that an officer had been injured at the Kim An restaurant. She decided to return to the restaurant, parking her vehicle in the back and entering through the back door. Frank navigated through the kitchen and reached the dining room, where Chow was anxiously waiting for help near the front door. As Chow hurriedly fled through the front door to the safety of arriving officers, Frank promptly identified herself as a police officer. But Chow, she says to the officers that she knew Frank was responsible for the crimes, tearfully accusing her of the acts. Subsequently, Chow and Frank were separately questioned in detail while seated at different tables within the restaurant. Frank was then taken to the police headquarters for further interrogation, during which she eventually confessed to the crimes implicating Lacaze as well. Both Frank and Lacaze were subsequently arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Frank and Lacaze, they were indicted by an Orleans Parish grand jury on April 28th of 1995. Their trials were held separately, with Lacaze being tried first from July 17th to July 21st of 1995. He was found guilty as charged and received a death sentence. Frank's trial commenced on September 5th, 1995. The evidence against her was overwhelming, leading her defense attorneys to choose not to present a defense case despite issuing subpoenas for 40 witnesses. On September 12, 1995, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all charges and recommended the death penalty. Frank was formally sentenced to death on October 20th, 1995, and subsequently transferred to death row at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women located near Baton Rouge and St. Gabriel, Louisiana. In 1993, Prior to the Kim An murders, Frank's father resided at her residence for a period of time. Subsequently, she reported him missing. In November of 1995, a month following her initial death sentence, law enforcement discovered a human skull with a bullet hole buried beneath Frank's house, guided by a dog. And according to news reports dating back to 2002, a psychiatrist testified that Frank's father subjected her to repeated resulting in multiple forced abortion. The police and prosecuting authorities hold the belief that the skull belonged to Adam Frank, her father, and posit that Antoinette committed his murder. Nevertheless, considering her existing death sentence for the Kim An murders, no attempt has been made to prosecute Antoinette for her father's demise. In the event of Frank's execution, she would become the first woman to be executed in the state since 1942. Originally, the Vu family's restaurant in New Orleans East continued to operate at the location where the tragic incident occurred. Furthermore, Hurricane Katrina inflicted damage upon the restaurant in 2005, and subsequently to the storm, looters pilfered the jewelry worn by Ha and Kwang at the time of their murder. Following that, Quoc Vu and his mother, Wynette, proceeded to sell the previous establishment and reopen their restaurant in Harahan, Louisiana. Though Rogers Lacaze was initially guilty and given the death penalty, it has since been reversed and he will just spend the rest of his life in prison. Might have something to do with his young age at his time of conviction as to why that would be reversed. But Antoinette Frank still sits on death row. Rest in peace to the 3 innocent victims taken from this world way too soon. Rest in peace to Kim An 3, taken from this world way too soon.